What's up, guys? Welcome to this week's Best Bets episode for UFC Noche Silva versus Diego Lopes, where I'll be discussing the most confident picks, the lock of the week, and the underdog of the week, and some parlays that I like. To get us back on track for lock of the week this week, personally, I got a lock of the week that I think not only wins, but dominates. As always, I hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a great day. Let's get started with the most confident picks for UFC Noche. We got Alexander Hernandez, Tatiana Suarez, and Silva. Starting off with Alexander Hernandez, I think we have to lean Alexander Hernandez in this matchup. He's coming off of a sharp performance against Chase Hooper just a couple weeks ago where he looked slick, moving in and out, landing clean, powerful shots, and even dropping Hooper in the first round. The only thing that gave him trouble were those oblique kicks to the knee, but aside from that, nothing really phased him. Hernandez had no respect for Hooper's power, stayed fast and accurate, and kept finding those big shots. That always been his style, sharp footwork, measured pace, measured pressure, and high output. And yes, he's been taken down before, and that's why he was such a big underdog in his last fight. But he was able to keep his standing and proved how dangerous he is when he dictates the range. Now, Hernandez has shown inconsistency against top level competition. We've seen him get held down or knocked out, but he always brings power and pace. Against Diego Pereira, I think that his in and out striking style, it will shine again. Diego's striking, it has improved, but his best weapon is still his grappling. The difference is Hernandez is sharper and more precise on the feet, and Diego hits harder than Hooper, but he's also much more hittable. And Hernandez has the tools to exploit that. And I expect Hernandez to maintain his range, use his speed to get in and out, and control the pace. Diego's best chance is to secure takedowns here, but Hernandez looks locked in right now, and he should be able to keep it standing, land the more damaging shots, and force Ferreira to work at a pace that's tough for him at 40 years old. If this fight goes into the later rounds, Hernandez's speed, accuracy, and cardio advantage could make the difference here. So moving on to Tatiana Suarez, we got Tatiana Suarez, she feels like the clear side here. She came into the UFC, went on a 7 fight unbeaten run, dominated everyone in her path, and she ran into Weili Zhang, and she's Weili Zhang, one of the greatest female fighters of all time, where Tatiana suffered her first loss. Now she's facing Amanda Lemos, who's at 38, is on the back end of her career and has never quite proven herself at the true elite level competition. And Suarez has everything you want in a lock. Dominant wrestling, elite jiu-jitsu, accurate striking, relentless pace, accurate striking when she's not facing Wei Li Zhang, right? But she has accurate pace or accurate striking, relentless pace, and the strength to overwhelm opponents with control time. She's not just technical, she's also physically imposing, and that combination has broken down nearly everyone she's faced. Amanda Lemos, she is a dangerous striker, no doubt, but she's a powerful striker with good accuracy, strong leg kicks, and strong body kicks, and improving wrestling. But the thing is, she's hittable, right? And absorbing more strikes than she lands, and her grappling defense remains a weakness. And as shown by her 2 career submission losses against someone like Tatiana Suarez, that's a glaring hole, and Tatiana Suarez will take advantage of that. I see Tatiana Suarez being able to secure the takedowns whenever she wants. She averages over 4 takedowns per fight, and once it's on the mat, she's clearly the superior grappler. Even on the feet, Tatiana is disciplined enough to avoid Lemos's her power shots, close the distance, and turn striking exchanges into entries for takedowns. For Lemos, her only real path to victory here is to keep the fight standing, using her footwork to create space and hunt for that one big power knockout shot, right? But Suarez is younger, more athletic, sharper, and too well rounded for that game plan to succeed consistently. More likely, Tatiana controls the fight, racks up takedowns, and either finds a submission or dominates on the scorecards. Moving on to our third most confident pick, our lock of the week, Silva. Guys, how can I not make him lock of the week when he literally has a lock tatted on his chest? In a striker versus striker matchup, Silva is the much more better and hungrier striker. Representing fighting nerds in Brazil, he's coming to get that win back. Out of all the rising names in the UFC, Silva is up there in terms of one of the best prospects coming up. And Silva's striking, his durability, his defensive skills make him special. It makes him that special talent. He's built like a tank, short and stocky, which makes it even harder for opponents to get in on his hips. And even when opponents do, his raw strength allows him to shrug them off. With 86% takedown defense, he keeps the fight standing where he is the most dangerous. Every shot he throws carries intent. His boxing is heavy. He uses his jab to bait opponents in, and his counter punching is sharp. Add in his confidence and his composure. He's often smiling and interacting mid-fight. He looks completely at home when he's in the octagon. And against Diego Lopes, this projects as mostly a striking battle. In his last fight with Volkanovski, Lopes didn't attempt a takedown. He just pressured forward, looking for the knockout. If he brings that same approach here, Silva should have the advantage. Silva doesn't brawl recklessly. He uses his footwork to lure opponents in and then counters with clean, accurate shots. Lopes is dangerous on the ground, with high level jiu-jitsu. So grappling exchanges could favor him, but stylistically, he tends to start fights aggressively with his boxing, which plays into Silva's strengths, right? So I see Lopes coming forward, looking to overwhelm, but Silva is hard to hit, and he's never been finished before, ever in his career. As the fight goes on, Silva usually finds his rhythm, grows into the fight, and starts landing the more damaging shots. His durability combined with disciplined movement makes him tough to crack, right? While Lopes' pressure could backfire against someone so fluid in the octagon like Gene Silva. I see Silva circling, countering, and gradually outstriking Lopes over time. I mean, we saw Joe Anderson Brito completely destroy Diego Lopes. I feel Gene Silva is a much higher level caliber fighter, right? And even if Lopes tries to mix in takedowns, Silva's strengths and his hips make him extremely tough to control. Add in his mental game. He loves trolling opponents, staying calm, and keeping the crowd engaged. And it's easy to see him frustrating Lopes in there. Lopes will be dangerous early, but Silva has the composure, the defense, and the striking IQ to weather it, stay patient, and take over as the fight goes on. Moving on to Underdog of the Week. We got... Oh, that was Gene Silva. Lock of the week. Moving on to Underdog of the week, we got David Martinez. I'm a big fan of David Martinez, and especially his striking. Rob Font is a solid veteran who's lost to elite names, and he just derailed some hype trains like Gene Matsumoto in a very close fight, and Kyler Phillips. Still though, at 38 years old, he's now facing a dangerous 27-year-old prospect in Martinez, who I think is the real deal. Font still looks sharp. He moves well. He has good footwork, but Martinez brings a different level of speed, power, and explosiveness. 10 out of his 12 wins have come by knockout, and while that was against lower level competition, the power difference here will be obvious. Martinez's debut, he showed accuracy, finishing ability, and composure. He looked like a fighter ready to belong at this level. And this fight should mostly play out on the feet. Font will come forward, throwing volume and relying on his excellent jab, but Martinez has the movement and kickboxing background to disrupt that rhythm. And Martinez, I see him being faster, more athletic, and when he lands, his shots will carry far more impact. Even though Font has never been knocked out, I expect Martinez's accuracy and power to shine through in this matchup, forcing Font to rely heavily on his durability in this matchup. Experience definitely favors Font. His resume of competition is far deeper, but stylistically, this matchup plays into Martinez's strengths, and he can control the pace with his distance. He can control the pace with his distance management, pick his moments to engage and land the sharper, heavier shots. Over the course of the fight, I see Martinez's speed and power and athleticism making the difference against a veteran who's starting to show his age, right? And that fight that Font had with Gene Matsumoto, it could have easily went the other way, in a very razor close fight. So I'm picking David Martinez to be on the right end of this fight, winning the fight, right? Okay. Moving on to the parlay section, we got a couple parlays that I want to talk about. Starting off with the safety lock. I think the money line here for Gene Silva is beyond playable. Safety lock at -260 for a fighter like Gene Silva, I honestly think he's being undervalued here. Usually for a safety lock, you need two great fighters to get odds like this. For Gene Silva to be like this by himself, I think it's excellent value in my opinion. Silva is one of the most reliable strikers on the card. He's defensively sound, 86% takedown defense, and thrives in counter striking battles. Lopes is dangerous, but he relies heavily on aggression. You see him when he gets hit, he gets angry, tries to come forward. Against someone like Silva, I'm pretty sure he can handle that really well. And it's a single anchor. I think it's chalk. It's a safe chalk piece to build around. Moving on to the iron lock, we got Gene Silva mixing in with Martinez Font over 1.5. So both fighters in Font and Martinez have never been knocked out. I expect this fight to go the distance, so over 1.5, in my opinion, is beyond safe. And then you're adding the anchor again, strong stylistic edge for Gene Silva, and also Font, he's historically durable. He's never been knocked out, like I said. And Martinez, while powerful, is still adjusting to UFC level pacing, and I see this fight going the distance. This parlay combines a high confidence pick with a historically reliable over to reduce risk. Right, moving on to our solid duo parlay at -135. I'm adding Kelvin Gastelum into the parlays. Mixing in with Tatiana Suarez. Gastelum, he's experienced, durable, has fought the best. He still carries that solid boxing and defensive wrestling. And talk about a brick head. He's the the brick of the heads. And then you're pairing that up with Suarez, a dominant wrestler with elite jiu-jitsu, proven control, younger, more athletic than Lemos, a stylistic matchup for her opponent. It's a veteran grit in Gastelum plus a dominant grappler. It covers two different styles, but both are consistent at -135. I think these two are a solid duo for sure. Moving on to Gene Silva and Alexander Hernandez, plus 155. You got smart money with Silva, the anchor, the safe anchor, and then Hernandez, who just showed sharp striking versus Hooper, aggressive in and out style, strong when he dictates the pace. And against Pereira, his speed and boxing should be the difference if he keeps it standing. You're pairing one of the safest favorites with a live value pick, turning this into plus money. I think it hits at plus 155. Moving on to the most confident picks, all three of them combined. You got Gene Silva, Alexander Hernandez, Tatiana Suarez at plus 215. It's the trio. You got Silva with the striking edge, Hernandez, an absolute dog with speed and volume, and Suarez with elite wrestling. These three complement each other. Silva and Suarez are high confident anchors, and then adding Hernandez is the value kicker, and I'm still confident in him. It's nice balance of safety and juice for plus 215. Moving on to the sweet drip parlay, plus 115 at David Martinez alone. You can add a Gene Silva in there if you want, but David Martinez alone, I do think he gets it done. He's young, he's a powerful striker, athletic, accurate, and explosive, facing a 38-year-old Rob Font who has been durable but hittable. Martinez has the speed and power edges. It's a straight dog shot with real upside. He doesn't need to knock out Font to win. He can outpoint him with speed and power shots. And in my opinion, it's a great single value play. Moving on to Underdog City, we're adding Alden Coria with David Martinez. It's a true lotto ticket. Both underdogs have realistic paths to victory. If they both hit, the payout is massive. It's worth a sprinkle. Not a bankroll anchor whatsoever. You got Martinez. Explained above, he's young, explosive, and it's great striking. He has great striking. And Alden Correa is a big underdog, but he has youth, speed, and an unorthodox style that can create chaos against a slower opponent. And I do believe that concludes the best bets video. So yes, that does conclude the best bets video. Remember, bet smart, don't chase any losses. Let me know if you found this helpful. Hopefully we get back on track with this week's lock of the week with Gene Silva after Mauricio Ruffy lost our lock of the week streak. I do think Gene Silva gets it done. Drop your picks in the comments. I want to hear who you're rolling with, and that's it for me. Have a great day. Take care of yourself. I love you guys. Good luck. I'm out. Peace.